Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is not a fun film to watch. Don't get me wrong, it's excellently crafted and easily in the top tier of Phase 4 MCU products. But sitting through the movie, whether in theaters or at home, is, well, difficult from an emotional standpoint. No Marvel project has ever been this unapologetic in its exploration of loss, grief, and trauma. Even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which certainly enters into deeply emotional territory, offers up ample humor to offset its darkest moments. Meanwhile, Black Panther 2 begins with a loss that is heavily inspired by the real-world passing of Chadwick Boseman and only gets more emotionally taxing as the narrative unfolds. But despite the fact that it is one of the hardest installments in the MCU for me to sit through, it is also perhaps the most impressive and emotionally nuanced entry in the franchise to date. But why is that? Well, it's important to establish that while this film does feature an amazing ensemble cast, Wakanda Forever is first and foremost the story of Shuri, and more specifically, the injustice of her situation. See, most narratives in film or television tend to operate with a sense of fairness. Bad things only happen to our heroes because they have a character flaw, and once they overcome it, things get better. Conversely, the villains lose because they choose to do something morally wrong. But fairness isn't a luxury that the characters in Black Panther are afforded. The death of King T'Challa comes without warning. There was nothing Shuri could have done, especially because her brother only asked for her help when his illness had already progressed too far. And the list of injustices only continues to grow from that point on. The core issue of the movie is the conflict between Wakanda and Talokan, but this is not a conflict of their own making. The only reason why Namor is pressuring the Wakandans into an alliance is because the American government has discovered vibranium under the sea, and Namor believes that an invasion of his homeland is imminent. Shuri and her mother are forced into a potential war, all because of the actions of a third party. On top of this, the Americans were only able to discover vibranium because they appropriated the technological development of a young black woman without her consent. The fact that this whole movie is built upon colonizers inciting violent conflict between two otherwise peaceful nations shows that Coogler is intentionally centering the concept of injustice in his film. Furthermore, it's not a coincidence that this conflict is introduced on the same night Shuri's mourning period was symbolically meant to end. The loss of her brother alone is more than enough trauma to motivate an entire film's worth of character growth, but the fact that her grieving is interrupted is as poignant as it is realistic. She isn't allowed to process her emotions one at a time. The tragedies she faces stack on top of one another in an unrelenting cycle, which continuously fuels the rage that is growing within her. And this rage, at least in my opinion, is what makes this film so impactful. We rarely get to see characters deal with anger in a deep or meaningful way. When heroes experience it, it's often framed as a momentary lapse of judgment that's quickly overcome. And in the case of villains, it's often an oversimplistic explanation of why they turned bad. But Wakanda Forever does not fall into this trap. Instead, it is sympathetic to the rage Shuri is feeling. See, one of the biggest gut punches in the whole movie is the death of Shuri's mother, Queen Ramonda. Not only is a loss of this magnitude unexpected in a film that already addresses the passing of a major character, but the cold-blooded intent with which it is done is absolutely bone-chilling. Namor vindictively targets the leader of Wakanda in order to punish them for their refusal to fall in line. When he says to Shuri,
"Bury your dad, mourn your losses. You are queen now."
he is intentionally stoking her rage. He doesn't believe that Wakanda is capable of fighting back, and therefore he thinks that he will be able to harness Shuri's anger in their fight against the surface world. But Shuri is as brilliant as she is angry, and that is a deadly combination. Rather than falling in line, the reluctant leader of Wakanda successfully recreates the heart-shaped herb and sets her sights on revenge. And this is where the incredibly nuanced morality of the film shines the brightest. Rather than some cliche theme about revenge always being wrong, Black Panther Wakanda Forever is bold enough to essentially say, Shuri should want revenge. In fact, Shuri enacting her revenge may very well be completely justified. But in the pursuit of vengeance, she would ultimately bring more suffering to her people. Justice, in this case, isn't what would bring about positive change. And this may very well be the most unfair situation Shuri is put into throughout the whole narrative. She didn't ask to lose each and every member of her family to violence and disease. She didn't ask to inherit the position of monarch, or even the mantle of Black Panther. And she sure as heck did not ask to be forced into an international conflict with America and Talokan. But through actions and circumstances completely out of her control, all of this responsibility and more is thrust upon her. The character who understands this dilemma the most is M'Baku. As Wakanda makes ready for war against the Talokan, the leader of the Jabari offers Shuri some wisdom.
Killing him will risk eternal war.
And so what? Was my mother's life not worth eternal war?
Of course, she was. But it is not what she would have wanted for you.
The reason I think this gets through to Shuri and ultimately convinces her to spare the life of Namor is because M'Baku is the first to truly acknowledge the injustice of her situation. He admits that it is understandable why she feels the way that she does. He frames her rage as a natural reaction to the trauma she has endured, rather than something to simply move past. In sympathizing with her anger and promising to follow her no matter what she decides, M'Baku reframes the rage within Shuri as something she has power over, not the other way around. Namor was the one to escalate the conflict with Wakanda. He presented them with an unjust ultimatum. Whatever Shuri decides to do could be considered morally justified, but from a practical standpoint, if she wishes to ensure the well-being of the people she governs, the burden of forgiveness falls upon her. When Namor had the upper hand, he chose to force violent confrontation upon the Wakandans. He chose to punish an innocent young woman for the actions of her corrupt government, and he chose to rob Shuri of her last living family member. But when Shuri finally has the upper hand, she makes a different choice. A choice that is, perhaps, the hardest she will ever make. The new Black Panther, Guardian of Wakanda, makes the choice to spare Namor rather than enact revenge, and in doing so, ensures the safety of those she is meant to protect. It is not fair that the burden of forgiveness falls upon Shuri, not after all she has been through, but even so, she bears it all the same. So yes, ultimately she makes the traditional good guy choice, but the fact that Ryan Coogler does not frame this as inherently the right thing to do is a surprisingly radical stance for a superhero movie to take. In the end, Shuri is able to process her anger and move through the final stages of grief uninterrupted, but she had to acknowledge that anger, acknowledge its validity, before she could let it go. And in doing so, she is ultimately able to move on, finally reaching out and finding her brother T'Challa right where her mother said he would be. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.